Welcome to Outside Ourselves, a podcast featuring conversations that remind us faith isn't something we do, it's something we receive. I'm Kelsey Climbera. I'm happy to be back here with you after about a month's break because of the holidays, and really looking forward to bringing you this first conversation of 2023. Today, I am chatting with my friend, my coworker, Chad Bird. Chad is a 1517 scholar in residence. He is the author of numerous books, and he is on his way quickly to becoming TikTok famous, which we talk about a little bit in today's conversation. In his most recent book, which is entitled Limping with God, Chad chronicles the life and the faith of Old Testament father Jacob. So I thought it would be good today to talk about the faith of the Old Testament fathers in general, and then delve specifically into the life and the person of Jacob. Chad brings us a word of comfort, a word of truth, and a word that is centered on the good news of Christ's work for you. Let's go ahead and get started. Chad, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to Outside Ourselves.
Yeah, thanks, Kelsey.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. And not just hear you, but
Happy New
actually
Year.
see you. Yeah, which is
Oh yeah,
wonderful.
we were having tons of audio issues earlier,
Yeah.
so we think we got them resolved. We're all set to go.
Yeah, I think we did. I always say technology is great when it works.
When it
When it
works,
works, it's great.
yes.
Yeah, but here we are. So
Yeah,
been looking
yeah.
forward to the conversation.
Do you want to just give us a little bit of info on who you are, what you do, for those few people who might be tuning in who have not been introduced to you and your work yet?
Yeah, I'll give you my typical line when I tell people what I do. I say, I get paid to talk about Jesus with an Old Testament accent. That's basically what I
That's
what I
awesome.
do. So I work for 1517, along with you, of course, and I'm what they call a scholar in residence. But I tell everybody what that really means is I produce content. So I write about a book a year and produce short videos, longer videos, articles, and then podcast and travel around speaking about the Old Testament here and there. So that is enough to keep me very busy. But I love doing it. I love talking about any aspect of the Old Testament, especially kind of where we're gravitating today with kind of the Genesis material. That's where I love to be in the Torah, so the first 5 books, and then in the Psalms. You know, if you were to like to ask me, where do you really want to where do you want to be in the Old Testament? It's usually one of those 2 places. So looking forward to talking about some Abraham and some Jacob and some other good stuff today.
Yeah. And when you say that you produce content for 1517, people should know you produce the most content for 1517 because I think when you say like a few videos, you have like a video a week, you have two podcasts?
Yeah, well, that are ongoing. Eric
Ongoing.
Sorensen and Dan Price and I did that one, A Field Guide to the Bible a couple years ago, a survey
That's
of
right.
the whole Old and New Testament. So that one's kind of a, it's there. It's not being added to or anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do 40 minutes in the Old Testament. Been doing that for a lot of years now. I think Dan and I started that back in 2015. Yeah, so a lot of years. I always tell everybody, so we're Genesis, and now we're 2 Kings. So I've mapped it out to where it's my job security. I'll retire when we get to the end of Malachi, which I'll probably be retirement age by the time we get there.
Yeah,
but we do that.
It'll be perfect.
Yeah, it'll be perfect. And then Hidden Streams is a podcast that I'm involved in. I just love a chance to spread the gospel in all these various places. I mean, everywhere from like face-to-face speaking in places to TikTok videos, which is kind of a new thing that I've been doing, to writing the books. So yeah, keeps me occupied.
Yeah, I've been meaning to ask you, how is the TikTok thing going? I know because you're posting these, they're basically Instagram reels or TikTok videos, and you post them to both places. Have you had much like one-on-one conversation with people because of that?
Yeah, actually.
Do you feel like it's an effective way to, I guess, get the gospel out?
Yeah, so I always have to give credit where credit is due. So no one would have ever seen my TikTok were it not for Stacy, my wife. She I don't know, it was probably earlier in 2022. I'm guessing maybe early in the year. She said, "Hey, well, she was she was researching TikTok because she wanted to have all her ducks in a row before she like brought it up to me because she knew I'd have questions." So she's like looking at what all you could do with TikTok. And so when she first said, "Hey, I think you should start a TikTok channel," I'm like, "Why would I do that?" That's- I had a very shallow impression of what TikTok was. I thought it was,
Yeah.
people a lot younger than me singing and dancing and, making kind of silly videos. And there's plenty of that on there. She said,
Yeah.
"No, no, no. Listen, there's TikTok videos on everything. Whether you're an auto mechanic or whether you're a dental hygienist which is what she was doing at the time, or whether you're an Old Testament guy." So I said, "All right, I'll think
Mhm.
about it." Anyway, that's why I started it, and it's been great. It's probably strangely, it has been the format that has taken off the fastest for me, as far of all the social
Oh,
media
wow.
platforms, and it is by
Okay.
far I guess, the easiest one for me to maneuver. So I can do a
Hmm.
video, I can begin and end a video in, like, from the time I start the video to the time it's posted, 15-20 minutes usually, which,
Wow.
that
That's
yeah,
amazing.
I mean, once you kind of figure out the app and the system and all that, it doesn't take a
Yeah.
long time. I mean, if it's something I've already, studied and taught about, then I don't have to do any kind of research. I just kind of put it out there. But, so what's been surprising is I have had, a lot of people connect with me because of TikTok. In fact, I spoke in, I think it was Dallas, your neck of the woods, a few months
Mhm.
ago, and I just thought maybe a week beforehand, I thought, "Well, I should put out a TikTok video where in case anybody's in the DFW area, then they can join me, for this presentation I'm doing."
Yeah.
And sure enough, there were, I don't know, 4 or 5 people that showed up that were there only because they
That's
had heard, yeah,
amazing.
heard about it on TikTok, and I've had other experiences like that as well. So it's been great. It gives me a chance. All the videos are around 90 seconds. That way I
Yeah.
can triple post basically TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. And it's I don't know, just a great video format for, if you got something real quick you wanna say, just kinda brief, kind of, make your point, and then let everybody be on to their next video. So, been overall a positive
Yeah.
experience for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's such a great tool for people to be able to kind of dip their toes into
Yeah.
what you're so good at. And I think, start to ask themselves or ask you on those platforms questions, deeper questions that are important and probably are questions that they maybe haven't asked before.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's great. Well, I always love seeing them. I feel like I've tried to do like one reel and it is definitely not taken me 15 to 20 minutes.
Well
And none of those have seen the light of day yet. So know that you're very good at it. You've figured it out
Oh,
and
thanks.
you do an amazing job. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead. Let's get started into what we're here to talk
Sure.
about today. Um, I wanted to ask you just up front if you could kind of give us a definition and kind of parameters for who exactly we're speaking about when we speak about the Old Testament fathers. Because I actually was preparing and realized that I wasn't exactly sure on a couple of people where they landed. So, who falls into that category?
Yeah, so typically when we talk about the Old Testament fathers, we're talking about the patriarchs. Uh, so Abraham,
Yeah,
Isaac, and Jacob. So all Genesis characters. I mean, you could certainly stretch that out farther. You could be talking about, for instance, Joshua, or maybe some of the judges, or even into the Kings, David. But typically, when we're talking about the faith, the Old Testament fathers, we mean the patriarchs, or you can even include the
yeah,
patriarchs and matriarchs there. So, yeah, kind of the famous trio: Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, grandfather, father, father, and son. There, uh, yeah, who are all three, at least two of them, are all just fascinating characters. I wrote
yes,
my last book about Jacob limping with God, and I could write a book about Abraham, kind of along these same lines, just because I mean, we know a lot about these guys. I mean, for ancient people, we know quite a bit about them. especially Jacob.
Yeah.
We kind of get into the nitty gritty of their personal lives, and the the biblical writer opens up the closet door, and we peer at their skeletons, they're hiding in there. So it's fun to think about them, and who they were, what they did, and their struggles, their weaknesses, their failings, all those things that shed light on the humanity that they share with us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that when we a lot of times when we think about and I know this is kind of how I grew up, when we think about the patriarchs or even just Old Testament figures and we think about their faith, I think I would say that I used to think about that faith as exemplary
Hmm.
because of what they did,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
because of their actions. But that's not necessarily how we should define their faith. You do a really good job, I think, of communicating that to people. So, can you kind of give us an overview of how Scripture talks about the faith of these patriarchs, and how it is different than, or it's not placed in what they do; it's placed somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, those are great points, because I do think we tend to they're sort of larger than life characters, right? Especially if you
Yeah.
grew up in the church as I did. You're hearing about Abraham and what a great man of faith he was from the time that you
Hmm.
are, your first years in Sunday school or VBS. And so over time, they do have kind of this larger than life personality for you. I mean, it's kind of like, I mean, not just, we don't do this just with biblical characters. We do this even with like the founding fathers of our nation, right? They're like
Right.
these
Yeah.
superhuman people. But then what happens is, say you have a just kind of that larger than life view of George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or whoever. Well, a lot of times what happens is, say you start really digging into their life and you realize, oh, there's a lot more to this person. There's a lot of layers to them, and we're only seeing one little side. And maybe it's the bright, wonderful, accomplishing great things side, but there's a whole other side to this person. It's the same thing with the patriarchs.
Mm.
Abraham, yeah, he was a great man of faith. Uh, but you kinda gotta finesse that, you know? Did he do some great things? Sure, yeah, but, if you were Abraham himself, or maybe you were his wife, Sarah, or his brother, or whoever, you would see all the various sides of Abraham, and you'd you'd meet the Abraham, who was grumpy, or he had his doubts, or you you read the biblical story, you hear about this guy who not once, but twice conceal the fact that Sarah was his wife to save his own
Yeah.
skin. And both times,
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't just a lie, but it was a lie with repercussions, because both times Sarah got taken in to the palace or the harem or whatever of these kings. So it wasn't just like a lie with no no repercussions. There was some pretty serious
Yeah.
stuff. So, and that's just Abraham. Jacob's the same way. So when we're thinking about the faith of these guys, it's always faith, the same as our faith. Our faith is never a mirror kind of faith where I'm looking at the guy in the mirror and saying, "Oh, what a strong believer he is." Kind of a faith in faith. Faith is always, as this podcast is called, it's outside ourselves. A faith is directed
Yeah.
to someone, and that someone, of course, is always Christ. And
Mm.
therefore, we talk about weak faith, strong faith, big faith, little faith. We like to put adjectives in front of faith, but really faith is faith.
Yeah.
Whether we perceive it to be strong or weak, whether we perceive it to be big or small, faith is just faith. Because it's this living connection that we have with the one who is faithful, and because of his faithfulness, then we know that we're going to be okay, because not because we
Mm.
believe, but because he's gonna be faithful to us. So just like
Yeah.
it was with them, so it is with us. We can put a lot of emphasis on faith, 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 but ultimately it's the one who is faithful to us that should be the focus of our
Yeah.
attention.
Yeah. The object of our faith.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so good. As we are talking about that object, though, there is a a difference in the way that you could say there's a difference in the way that the patriarchs had faith in Christ, who was yet to come, in God's promises, who that were yet to be fulfilled, and then we have faith. If you're going along this linear timeline, we have faith in Christ who has come and will come again. Does that change anything? How do we kind of reconcile those, I guess, linear differences?
Yeah, you can kind of, if you picture history on this continuum, or this linear path from when the promise is first made in Genesis 3:15 to the incarnation of Christ, and then finally to his future coming. Yeah, there's different ways in which faith is construed, I guess you could say, because yeah, all the people in the Old Testament, their faith is very much a forward look. Well, I was going to say it's very much a forward-looking faith. It is and it is and it isn't. So it is looking forward
Okay.
to the fulfillment of the promises, but at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
their faith is built upon the trustworthy promise that God gave in the past, if that makes sense. So God
Yeah.
says
Yeah.
God says to Adam and Eve right after the fall, I'm gonna put, well, he actually says it to the serpent, which I kind of love. He's like talking to the serpent. It's gospel, but he's talking to the serpent. He's like, I'm gonna put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed, and he's gonna he's gonna crush your head, and you're gonna strike his heel. So that promise of the coming seed, which was uttered in the past by a trustworthy God, that becomes the basis upon which the Israelites knew that they could trust. They could have faith in the fact that God would fulfill that. So faith kind of is
Mm,
it's looking forward and backward. It's looking backward. Even the Old Testament is looking
yeah.
backward to the promise made, and then forward to when that promise is going to be fulfilled. And in a way, we're kind of like that because we look back to everything that
Yeah.
Christ has done, but we also have
Mm-hmm.
faith. We trust in his promise to come again on the last day.
Yeah.
But I mean, there is still, yeah, a difference. I mean, they didn't know as much as we know as far as what Christ was going to do. Uh, even the disciples themselves, after all those years of learning for Jesus, they were still a bit fuzzy about things. So we can't expect
Yeah.
the Old Testament people, to have this grandiose theological understanding of who the Messiah was going to be. None of them did. I mean, they all had some pretty serious gaps in their knowledge, which was fine. I mean, none of us have a perfect knowledge of Jesus. We're all incomplete in a way. But as long as we're trusting in him, just like they were trusting in him, then we have the faith that saves.
Yeah, that's amazing. I guess I haven't ever made that connection of it's almost like like a faith sandwich that
Yeah,
we're all kind of
we're in
in
the middle.
between.
Yeah.
We're in the middle, and Christ and his work is surrounding us in the past and in the present and in the future. So I guess I don't know if it's a sandwich then, because he is working in the present too, but
At
I
we'll
like the
run with the
sandwich
metaphor. I like the sandwich
metaphor.
metaphor too.
We'll run with
Yeah,
it.
sounds
Yeah.
good.
That's awesome. We actually read a lot about Abraham's faith in particular in the New Testament.
Mhm.
He's brought up by Paul, by the author of
Hebrews? Yeah.
Hebrews. Um, is there anything in particular? I know you've already kind of talked about him a little bit, but in particular, uh, maybe especially out of those passages, I think it's Hebrews 11 and maybe Romans 4,
Mhm.
um, that we can kind of help us in our understanding of how God gifts us faith. Anything that you think is important for people to note?
Yeah, so Abraham's faith is talked about a couple different ways, actually more than a couple, but so Paul, for instance, in Romans is making a pretty big deal about the fact that, for instance, Abraham believed before he was circumcised. So he points to the
Hmm.
fact that his
Yeah.
faith comes before the circumcision of the covenant and all those things that implies. So one of the things that Paul wants to drive home is the fact that Abraham believed and it was reckoned him as righteousness apart from works, which of course is kind of what the definition of faith is. If it's not a
Yeah.
faith, a working faith in the sense that faith is a work that we somehow give to God and are thereby justified. Even though that I think that is it's kind of a pretty widespread misunderstanding that people have.
Yeah,
My faith
totally.
is
Absolutely.
my work, and you even have a language like, "How are you saved? Why are you saved? Because of my faith." Well,
Yeah.
no, no, your faith wasn't up on the cross. Jesus was up on the
Yeah.
cross. So there is kind of that
Yeah.
misunderstanding sometimes. And now, I love what Hebrews 11 does with it because he talks about how Abraham went forth not knowing where he was going, and he was looking for this city that has
Mm,
foundations. So there is this element about faith where it's like there's a certain blindness to faith, and that you can't really you can't see that which you believe in. It's the same thing Jesus said to Thomas, right?
mm.
Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. So I people probably get tired of me using this quote, but I think it's perfect. I use it all the time. I took it from one of my profs, Ken Corby, who probably stole it from Martin Luther. But anyway, whoever originally said it, he said, "To see the work of God, you pluck out your eyeballs and stick them in your ears." Now, what he meant
Hmm.
by that is that to see how God is at work, you don't look, you listen. So you're
Mm.
seeing out your ears. Basically, you're understanding your reality based upon what God has said in his word instead of what you see in front of you. Because very often what you see in
Yeah.
front of you is going to contradict what God has promised. And Abraham and
Yeah.
Sarah, I mean, what a great example of that. I mean,
Yeah.
they're both super old. Well, not I shouldn't say super old. They're both super old when it comes to having a kid. The older I get, like 65 is like, it's not that old.
They're in their
They're
prime.
their
It's
prime, they're
fine.
prime. So, yeah, you got these 2 people who are well past the age of having kids. Uh, and yet God says, "You're gonna have kids, or you're gonna have a son." And then they wait, they wait, and they wait, and they wait, and they wait. I mean, they're waiting, 25 years before Isaac is finally born. Now, everything that they saw, if they were able to stand in front of a mirror and look at their old wrinkled body, you're like, we're not making a kid. This is not gonna happen."
Yeah.
So they had to view
Yeah.
reality through their ears. They had to trust in what the creator of heaven and earth, who brought everything out of nothing, had said to them. Trust that from the nothingness, the deadness of their own bodies, like Paul talks about, life would come forth. So in
Hmm.
that way, the birth of Isaac is a type of the resurrection. Just like Christ came out of the death of the tomb alive again, so
Yeah.
Isaac comes forth from this dead womb of Sarah as a living child. So that element of kind of the blindness of faith, looking out your ears, that's a huge part of Abraham's story. And I mean, talk about contemporary. I mean, that's an undying truth that all of us readily understand, that trust in
Hmm.
Christ. Because I mean, so many aspects of our lives just scream that which is contrary to what God has promised. You know,
Yeah.
uh, you can you can just come up with a myriad of examples about how that there's turmoil in our lives, or we're going through a terrible season in life, or the world is falling around apart around us, or all
Yeah.
these things are happening, and God comes along and He says, "It's all good. It's all
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
I love you. You're forgiven." And so there's this dissonance between what our eyes see and what our ears hear from God. And so that is that ongoing contemporary aspect of Abraham's life that applies to us today.
I think it's interesting too that even though there's this dissonance, um, God continually backs up his promises from the moment he makes that promise, like you talked about in Genesis. I learned this from you, and I think mainly just listening to you and Dan on 40 Minutes, how God proves he's trustworthy. He doesn't just say like, "Believe me, I'm trustworthy,"
Mhm.
and that's the end of it.
Right.
Like he proves it over and over again. So there is still um, this part of faith that kind of catches us when we feel like, well, what is happening? Where is he telling me to look?
Mhm.
He's telling us to look, like we've said over and over again already, to Christ, because Christ is the one that is proving that true. I don't know. There's something there that's interesting to me, and kind of stands in the face of people rolling their eyes that the Christian faith is blind faith, or it's
Yes,
like
yes.
faith in a fairy tale.
Right, yeah, and one of the ways the Old Testament, to kinda go outside of Genesis, one of the ways that the Old Testament is always affirming the truth of what you just said is it'll hearken back to what God has done in the past. Not just what
Yeah,
he promised, even though that's important, but what he did. And, the
yeah,
Psalms are full of this. So the psalmist sometimes will be lamenting, like, I mean, I'm kinda putting words in his mouth, but, like, "Oh, my life is so terrible, everybody hates me. My my dog died, my truck broke down, my life is just in shambles." But then there'll be this transition, it'll be like, "But I will remember the deeds of the Lord. I'll think back to
mm,
what he did in times
hmm,
of old." And almost all the time, what they'll do is they'll think back to the Exodus. Like, "Oh, yeah, but God brought our fathers out of Egypt. But God brought our fathers to the Red Sea. But God brought our fathers all the way to the promised land." So, they'll think back, of course, to the promises of God, but to the
yeah,
promise-keeping God. They actually did this
yeah,
stuff for his people. And for me, that's a tremendous comfort too in our own lives, because when I'm in that place, like, woe is me, all this terrible stuff is happening, has God forgotten to be gracious, as one of the Psalms says? Has he changed? Is he no longer for us? I think, wait, just a minute. He sent Jesus. I mean, he's done all of these wonderful things for me in Christ, and not just in that way, but also in my own life. He's done all these wonderful things for me in the
yeah,
past. So you gotta borrow light from the past when your present is
hmm,
cloaked in darkness. You gotta
hmm,
think back to when that sun of grace was shining really brightly in your life, in those times when you're looking around and all you feel like you have is just night all around you. Because the psalmists do that, and it's a great way of coping with all of the pitfalls of life. You know,
yeah,
f you know, f For me, it's been so crucial these last 6 months, uh,
yeah,
with our losses to think beyond those 6 months to all the times that God has been so good and gracious to us in the past, and then to kinda to lean on that, to know that it's like he got us, through hard times in the past, he's gonna get us through this as well. So
yeah.
that's all over the Old Testament, and it's mapped all over our own lives as well.
You are a testament to that, I think, for sure this past year, just how you have spoken that. Sorry, oh my goodness.
Ah,
I know that
same here.
you've had a
Mhm.
tough year, Chad, and yeah, I think to see how we're all going to respond differently in suffering, and that's important to remember, but to see how you and Stacy have stood and spoken that truth, even when I know that you're not probably feeling great, is has been really amazing to witness.
Yeah,
So thank you
yeah,
for sharing that with everyone.
yeah, thank you.
Uh,
It's a I mean, I decided early on, after Luke's death, after our son's death, that, as much as I could emotionally handle it, I wanted to honor his memory, I guess you could say, by
yeah,
letting everyone know that, in the midst of tragedy, the resurrection is still true. Yeah. It
yeah,
doesn't uh, Jesus is still risen, and, no amount of suffering, no amount of loss, no amount of death, no amount of pain and grief, even though those are all real things that we struggle with, is gonna be able
yeah,
to cancel the the truthfulness of this, which isn't just true, but then just floods us with hope and consolation as well. And I'm glad that God has given me the opportunity to do that, and glad that, I've been able to do that because people have told me that it's been an encouragement to them. I've heard from a lot of people, a lot of parents who have lost their
yeah,
own
yeah,
children or spouses, and, uh, I think a lot of times what happens is someone in my position who is able to share a lot what we end up doing is doing nothing more than actually speaking the words that other people kind of have on the inside, but they can't quite verbalize. I mean, I think authors do
Mm,
that,
yeah.
speakers do that all the time. We don't say new things. We just are able to say things in such a way that people hearing us will be like, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. I just couldn't really put it into
Yeah.
those words. Uh, so we're like reminding them of that which they already know, or maybe telling them these things which are it's kind of hard to grapple with at the moment because the pain is so intense. So anyway, going on a tangent, but I'm
No.
thankful for
No,
for
that's
the
not a tangent at
yeah,
all.
thankful for the
Yeah, not
chance
at
to do
all.
that, and for people who have
Yeah.
you know told me just how it's helped them. Grateful for that opportunity.
Yeah, I know that it's impacted so many people and will continue to do so. So thank you for even sharing now. I want to get a little bit into Jacob because, as you mentioned at the beginning, you've written a whole book on this one
Yeah,
guy who is is kind of a finicky character.
yeah.
Um, can you tell us a little bit about why you chose to write about him? Because he isn't necessarily the guy in the Old Testament that we could even, you know, they all have their flaws, but he's like the furthest guy in a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
ways from being able to finagle into a hero. So why Jacob?
Yeah, Jacob is a lots of different reasons. I think when Dan and I went over his life in 40 Minutes of the Old Testament, I kind of became, super interested in him, just as a personality. And then, I got to thinking, in the biblical story, we know more about him than, most everybody else. I mean, we do know a lot about David, but say even David, we know nothing about David's life prior to when he's introduced to us when Samuel goes to
Mm,
anoint him. We don't know what he was like as a
yeah,
in his youngest days. Jacob, like, we meet him, he's not even born yet. He's, like, in the womb
yeah,
wrestling with his brother. That's our first exposure to him. And then, we read about his birth, and then, yeah, a lot of years are skipped early on, but we know basically him from womb to tomb. We know him from the moment of he's
mm,
conceived all the time until he's an old, old man in Egypt. So, big span of life there, lots to work with. And if that were not enough, he is, he's arguably the most colorful character in the Old Testament. At times, you can't stand him because he's such a jerk and he's so egotistical. And then and then at times you kind of feel sorry for him. You like when he's older and, his sons trick him, they deceive the deceiver and make
yeah,
him think that Joseph has been torn to pieces by a wild animal, and you hear him say, my gray hair is gonna go down into Sheol, and it's like, "Oh, man, poor guy," So, anyway, he represents this whole range of emotions, and we know all these things that happen in his life, uh, and he's just, his family is a mess. It's so dysfunctional. He's making he's married basically to 4 women at the same time. It's just like, "Oh my
yeah,
goodness gracious." Now, on top of all that, Jacob is basically the head of what we would call the Old Testament church. He's like
mm,
so, I mean, his family, that's the nucleus of Israel, right? So Jacob, his name is changed, or he's given the additional name of Israel, and so you have
yeah,
Israel, he's at the head, he's the patriarch of this family, but, this family is basically the Old Testament church, and it is it's not perfect. It's very imperfect.
yeah,
Uh so again, that's kind of the contemporary nature of the Old Testament. You read about these guys' lives, you see their personalities, their struggles, strengths, weaknesses, family problems, marital problems, kid problems, and you're like, "Wow," turns out the most contemporary book in the world is the Old Testament. Here's
yeah,
all of these people that
yeah,
are look around at myself, at my family, at your neighbors. It's all still happening today.
yeah. I find it interesting when non-Christians are like, look at how terrible the Old Testament is. And it's like, yeah, look at how terrible the Old Testament is. That's like look at
That's
like
the point, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yes.
There's a lot of people sinning all over the place, just like today.
Yep. Yeah.
Um
Hasn't changed.
yeah. you have a favorite story about Jacob? Because there's so many. Do you have one or two that kind of are your favorite to tell or to teach?
Yeah, I guess, well, it's kind of like it's probably one of the most well-known episodes from his life, but, it does remain
Yeah.
one of my favorites. In fact, it's where I got the title for the book, Limping with God, and that's when he has
Yeah.
the struggle with, well, it's called the man and, the messenger as well as God, so all 3 different names for the same person, which I think this is a appearance of the Son of God in the Old Testament, so I talk about how it's Jesus is wrestling with Jacob in that episode. But yeah, I love it because, I mean, you have Jacob down in the dirt. He's wrestling with the Son of God all night, and it's a scene like no other scene in the Old Testament, and no other scene in the Bible itself. But and then when Jacob emerges from this, he's limping. He's
Hmm.
he's had his hip wrenched or something during the fight, and
Yeah.
he limps away from this. So he walks away from this encounter with God wounded. Um, and that way, he's so representative of where we are in much of our lives as well. We, uh, we walk away from a lot of our encounters, not like standing tall and striding forth victorious, but we're limping, we're crawling away because we've been weakened in order that we might begin to rely more on the strength of God rather than our own
Hmm.
perceived strengths, whatever those might be.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of the whole, "When I'm weak, then I'm strong, thorn of the flesh" kinda stuff that Paul talks
Yeah.
about there in that encounter.
I love that story too. But I find it interesting that the man or
Mm.
Jesus, I think it's the line that says they wrestled all night and the man couldn't overcome him.
Mhm.
And then I think, doesn't he turn to Jacob and say, um, you have overcome, like you have basically like, I give up
Yeah, you win.
kind of.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. How, because fun and embarrassing fact, I maybe wrote something very early in this was like in college about that and completely, I know, misinterpreted that. Um, Probably saying something like, I have overcome my struggles, which is hilarious to anyone who's not 21 years old. Um, but that still kind of sticks out to me. Like, why would Jesus say something like that to Jacob there? What would be how does that fit in?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a great question. So, here's the way I kind of fit it into the big story. So, yeah, they're wrestling all night, and, and at the end of it, when he won't let the messenger go, when Jacob won't let Jesus go, then he's gonna give him a new name. So the name that he gives him, of course, is Yisrael, Israel, as we say it. But then he explains it. He says, "Because you have striven, fought, wrestled with God and man, and have prevailed." So you're called Yisrael because you have sarah. That's a Hebrew verb there. You've wrestled or you fought with
Hmm.
God and man and have prevailed.
Okay.
Now we all know. I mean, we all know. Okay, if a mortal is fighting God, or even for those people who think it's an angel, okay, all right, whatever. For a mortal to fight an angel, for a mortal to fight Jesus, there's no way the mortal's winning. I mean, it's not happening. The only
Right.
way that the mortal,
Yes.
in this case Jacob, wins is by God letting him win. Okay,
Right.
so God lets Jacob win, and not only that, but he gives him this incredible name, Israel, God fighter, basically. Now,
Hmm.
the way I like to explain this is this is all by grace. This is all mercy. God lets this human being win the fight against him, and as if that's not enough, he actually gives him a prize. He says, here's a great name. You're the God fighter. You're Israel." Now, the way I explain that is I say that episode is like a keyhole, and if you look through that keyhole of that story, what you see in the other room is the crucifixion of Jesus. Because
Hmm.
that is the only that episode is kind of a window, this keyhole, into what is to come. When Jesus doesn't come for, like, one night of being, a human being so he can wrestle with Jacob, but he becomes everlastingly a human being in his incarnation. And then what happens finally? Well, Israel, along with the Gentiles, they get their hands on him. And what do? Well, they struggle, they wrestle, and they end up pinning him to the cross. They crucify
Hmm.
him. And all this time, Jesus could have called on his Father to send myriads of angels to his rescue. He
Yeah.
doesn't do it. He lets humanity win. And not
Yeah.
only that, but he bestows on us all of his gifts of grace and mercy. He calls us Christian. He calls us children of God.
Hmm.
And in that way, what happens when Jacob wrestles is this preview of the incarnation, the ministry, the crucifixion, the resurrection, the adoption of us as his people. So it's a testimony uh, to the mercy and the grace of God, that he is able
Yeah.
to get down in the dirt with us, to wrestle with us, to let us win, and then to give us this wonderful gift on top of all of it. Even though Jacob was
That's
undeserving,
amazing.
we're undeserving as well. And so many times that
Yeah.
that story is used to be like, you gotta wrestle with God in prayer. You gotta give it all you
Yes.
got. You know, it's so we
Yeah.
make it
Absolutely.
about ourselves. You're like, be like Jacob and really wrestle with God, and he'll give you what you oh, come on. It
Yeah.
was all gift. It was all
Yeah.
mercy. That's all it was.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. That's very helpful. I don't think I realized, or I don't think I knew Israel means God fighter
Yeah.
until just now.
Yeah.
What an amazing name in more ways than one. Uh,
Yes. Yes.
because they were always the, you know, Israel was always fighting
Oh,
God.
yeah. 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 Yeah, it was
Yeah.
yeah, it's a wonderful name. I mean, the Israelites were the God fighters. So, yeah, I mean, it
Yeah.
originated there, and then, yeah, there's all this there's kind of a multivalence to it. It has all these kind of multiple implications, some positive, some negative.
One thing that I would love for you to talk a little bit about, I caught this in Limping with God, is your chapter on the stairway to heaven.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you bring in some interesting information about how that would have traditionally been understood in Jewish tradition.
Mhm.
Can you kind of give us a summary of that? Because I think it's really interesting and something I don't think I had heard before.
Yeah, it's a fascinating text, because of the way it relates in the Old Testament itself and to the ancient Near East, as well as even into some Jewish interpretive traditions about it into the 1st century. So, basically what you're looking at here is so this Jacob is asleep, he has this dream, he sees
Yeah.
the sulam in Hebrew, which is usually translated as stairway. Sometimes people call it a ladder. It's not really a ladder, it's a stairway. Stairway to heaven.
And this is before the he wrestles with God. This
Yes.
is like a different scene, right?
Yeah.
Just to clarify
Yeah,
that for
in fact,
people. Yeah.
it's kind of the bookend. So the first bookend. So this happens right when
Okay.
he's leaving for exile. So he's alone with
Okay.
God. God appears to him and speaks to him when he's leaving. And then when he gets back after the 20-year exile, once more he's alone. God appears to him and God speaks with him, but he also fights with him. So this is kind of the A of the B of those two parts. So uh, he has this vision, the stairway, the angels are ascending and descending on it, and then God appears to him. And I would argue that Hebrew should be translated God is standing not above it, meaning at the top of the stairway, but beside him. Uh, the Hebrew pres-
Hmm.
the Hebrew prepositional phrase used there, alav, can be translated either way accurately. So I think the narrative kind of suggests that God isn't like way up there, but he's like right down there by Jacob talking to him. But either way,
Mm.
what's happening there is this. So in the ancient Near East, they had what were called ziggurats, which were these step-shaped, kind of pyramid-shaped worship structures with stairways going up to
Okay.
the top, and at the top is where the deity would have been. So this is probably kind of what's happening in the vision that Jacob has, except in this case, God's not at the top. He's actually come down. He's right there on the ground beside Jacob and speaking to him. So what he's promised there is basically that, hey, I'm here with you. This is the gate of heaven because this is where I have promised to be for you. This is where I'm gonna speak to you. And there's sort of uh, sort of a what's the word I'm looking for? Um, there's what the way it's portrayed is sort of an attack against some of the other constructions of how God appeared. For instance, Babylon. The name Babylon itself is supposed to mean the gate of the gods or the gate of heaven.
Mhm.
Well, here, what does Jacob say when he wakes up? He says, "Well, this is the house of God. This is the gate of heaven." So this is where
Hmm.
the true God has appeared to Jacob and promised him these blessings. Now, if you go further afield, if you go like into some of the interpretations in the first century of the Jews, they thought that there was an image of God. I mean, excuse me, there was an image on the divine throne, and that image was of
Okay.
Jacob. So what the angels were
Yeah.
doing is they were going down to look at Jacob's face so they could go back up and compare it to the image that was on the divine throne.
So how that's what I think caught me off guard. Sorry to stop you,
No,
but
no, yeah.
where are they getting where is that coming from?
Where would
Why
that
would there be why?
Yeah, I don't
Why, Chad?
yeah, I
Why?
know. I wish I knew. No, I really don't know where that idea came
Okay.
from. Uh, but yeah, that was it was written into some of the Targums, which were Aramaic paraphrases of the Old Testament.
Okay.
So it surfaces there as well as in some other writings, such as a Genesis commentary called Bereshit Rabbah. Uh, so it's
Okay.
recorded in various places in these Jewish traditions. So some people think that in John 1, when Jesus says to Nathanael, "Oh, you're gonna see greater things than this. You're gonna see the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." What he's kind of alluding to is that interpretive tradition. He's saying, "Oh, no, it's not Jacob's face that's on the divine throne. It's mine. I am the image of God.
Hmm.
I am the representative of the Father." And so the angels ascending and descending are connected with me and not with Jacob,
Okay.
which is
Interesting.
one more little tidbit about that.
Yeah.
When Nathanael comes up, what does Jesus say? He says, "Behold, an Israelite in whom there is no guile or in whom there is no deceit." Well, what was Jacob known as? He was the deceiver. He was full of
The
guile. So
deceiver.
I wonder if that's another
Yeah.
little hint that we're connection
Connection.
between Genesis and what's happening in John 1.
I think you said this in the book too. The angels I mean, this is based on Jesus's words, descending and ascending on
Yes,
Jesus, right?
yes.
That's also interesting and kind of flies in the face of what we think of when we think of a stairway
Yeah.
to heaven as God standing up there and waiting for us to ascend.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
yeah. There's the whole stairway theology where you gotta, like, work your way up to God and climb the stairs up to
yeah,
God. I with it listen, if you wanna talk about stairs, okay, the stairs is Jesus. He's the
yeah,
stairway. You don't climb from his big toe up to the top of his head. He is it. So he's the first step and the
yeah,
last step toward heaven. He is the only connection that we have to the Father.
yeah. Amazing. I think another thing that this is just another connection that you made when you're so good at doing this in limping with God was the parallel between Jacob's words when he's reunited with Joseph, and this is obviously at the end of his life. Um, the comparison between those words and Simeon's words when he sees uh,
Mm,
Jesus for the first time
yeah.
in Luke 2. What is the significance there of that connection? I think you just talk about the fact that the words are very similar.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, so Simeon is able to hold baby Jesus in the temple and says, Lord, now you can let your servant depart in peace, for my eyes have seen your salvation." I've been
yeah,
waiting all this time. I mean, we don't know how old Simeon was, but his words connote that he was an older man. So I've been waiting all this time. Uh, and here now I hold in this child the promise of God in the flesh. And here you have Jacob, who for all these years has thought that Joseph was dead. And what Tolkien would call a eucatastrophe, the sudden turn of events
hmm,
where you think all hope is lost, and all of a sudden, no, hope is like in full blossom. Now he hears his son is alive, and not just alive, but he's ruler of all Egypt, of all things. So when they're reunited, there is there's this joining together of father and son in a moment that Jacob's able to say basically, now I can die in peace because
yeah,
I'm actually able to touch this one that I thought I would never be able to see again. And so there's this parallel between this unexpected change of events where hope is actually placed in our grasp, literally. He holds
Hmm.
Joseph, his son, and then Simeon holds Jesus in his arms, and so both are just wonderful, emotionally laden scenes where you see someone who really didn't think that they would ever come to the point where they were, and yet now here they are. Uh, and
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, life takes on a whole new kind of perspective at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting too. I don't know. I always assume Simeon was this very faithful man of God, and Jacob, I really do
Maybe
see
not so
as like
much.
yeah. Well, and he's such an interesting character because people talk all the time about um the life as a Christian being one of of suffering, of hardship, life in general.
Mm,
That's what it is. But I don't think we're as quick to talk about the fact that we actively, even as believers, push against faith. We don't always want it,
mm,
and yet God, opens our hands and He forces it into our hands.
yeah.
And I think Jacob's such a beautiful picture of that because
Mhm.
he's just at every turn, and I laugh at him, we laugh,
Yeah,
but we're
yeah,
the same way, um trying to turn our backs on God, and yet he continues to turn us towards him. Have you
yeah.
found that to be true?
Oh, yeah, yeah. It reminds me of I recently read the book A Severe Mercy. Uh, a
Okay.
guy recommended it to me. It's a story of loss about it's about a man who, it's the love of his life, and she ends up dying, and his struggle they became Christians together out of atheism. They knew C.S. Lewis,
Hmm.
and, at one point after her death, he's in a really, really bad spot. He, like, goes out into the country to a place there where he and his wife used to go, and he basically says, "And I tried to unbecome a Christian," basically. Like,
Oh, wow.
I tried to just say, "For I don't believe any of this, forget it, it's not true, blah, blah, blah." He's like, "I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it.
Huh.
I couldn't leave Christ." And I think things like that are happening all the time, where God is just basically we're running away from him, and he's like, "Oh, no, 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 I'm gonna chase you down and bring you back." Uh, it happens with Jacob, it happens with us, it's happened in my life, multiple times where you can't get
Yeah.
away because, I mean, to use my favorite instance of this, Psalm 23, goodness and mercy, they don't follow us, they pursue us, uh, they chase us
Hmm.
down. It's the famous hound of heaven kinda imagery where no matter where you go, no matter how you might try and get away from him, no matter how far astray you might go, you always got God on your heels, and he's always bringing you back, and he's
Yeah.
always like, "No, no, 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 I've got more stuff to give you. I've got more good gifts to give you.
Yeah.
I love you too much
Yeah.
to let you go." And thank God for that, because, if it was up to me to stay on the straight and narrow, and, and find my way back if I got lost, forget it. Woe is me. I'd be doomed, but
Yeah.
we have a God who pursues us, who brings us back, who searches for the lost sheep and takes us back to the fold.
Absolutely. Amen.
Mm.
I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much, Chad, for your time. As always, I love getting to chat and learning from you and gaining your wisdom and insight. So
Thanks,
thanks for
Kelsey.
the time.
Yeah, enjoyed it. Appreciate it.
Outside Ourselves is a 1517 podcast. To learn more about all of our podcasts, go to 1517.org/podcast. And if you haven't been on our site, I encourage you to spend a little bit of time poking around. Thank you as always for watching, for listening, for reviewing Outside Ourselves. I've so enjoyed getting started on this project and have been so encouraged by those who listen and respond. So thank you.